My name is Bernie Ouellette. I'm from Rocky Mountain House, Alberta, a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. Well, I had prostatitis, which is an infection of the prostate for years. So I naturally had higher PSA readings. PSA is one of the readings that they take in order to detect cancer. And I've had this for years. So a higher PSA wasn't scary to me or to my doctor, being aware that I had prostatitis, or I'd been diagnosed with that. It was in June, though, of 2018, last year, 2018, that it spiked significantly. And so it was enough of concern to the doctor that he recommended that I see a doctor in Red Deer. And so I went. And he looked at the readings and he said, I think we should do a biopsy. That dreaded word, it seemed like. But he kind of allayed all my fears about that. And so that was what was to happen. And so I did. I underwent a biopsy in the month following. And a month later, I received the diagnosis that I had prostate cancer. And it was a type of cancer that, should we say, there's two kinds that he explained to me. There was good cancer and bad cancer, in the sense that the good cancer was one that was slow growing. And the other part was bad cancer, which is fast growing. And he told me the good news is, well, should I say, the bad news is, first of all, that I had cancer, prostate cancer. But the good news was that it was mostly of the slow-growing kind, and there was a few of the bad kind, which they wanted to treat because they were fast-growing. And in a sense, those were the ones that would be life-threatening. They could expand or metastasize, I think it's called, and they could go to your bones, et cetera, et cetera. So I agreed to the treatment. He explained to me the treatment that I would be undergoing. Because of my age, I was 76 at the time, surgery was not recommended because of the side effects of surgery for a person my age. And so it was decided that I needed to have radiation treatment followed by hormone treatment. And that was explained to me. The doctor that I went to see in Red Deer was very good at explaining. My wife, by the way, was with me all the time. Good thing, because it's always good to have an advocate. So when my mind was full of questions, but she seemed to anticipate that, and she asked the questions a lot of times, because I was overwhelmed with the diagnosis right away. I think we have a misconception that cancer is a death sentence. And I think in a lot of cases it isn't. But that's the conception we have. I grew up with that. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say, so-and-so has cancer, and then they were cured? You don't hear that very often. What you do hear is, so-and-so died from cancer. You don't even hear that they had it. And so that's what we hear. That's what we're overwhelmed with. And so when you become a cancer patient, that's the first thing how long do I have? What do I do now? Where do I turn? How can I afford this? All those types of questions come to your mind. And so I wasn't really paying attention to a lot of times to what the doctors were saying to me, but my wife was. And so she asked the questions and we got the answers that we needed. My family doctor in Rocky was a great support to us. He opened the doors. I like to use the word fast-tracked. He anticipated what we might need to the extent that he ordered tests, MRI, bone scans, etc., that would be necessary coming up. But he anticipated that and did that for me, so that when I went back to Red Deer to the doctor, I think the proctologist, he said, I'm going to order a bone scan, MRI, etc. And he said, they're already done. He had already anticipated it, helped us. So that probably eliminated 6 weeks from my from my treatment. So much so that from the time of diagnosis to the time that it started the treatment and the plan was in place, it was 6 weeks. But unfortunately, I had to go to Red Deer to get the treatment. That was the biggest thing. When I was first diagnosed, as I said, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know where to turn, who could help me, how could we afford this, what was the treatment going to be like, where would I have to go? And I turned to the MNA, and unfortunately at that time, they were unable to answer my questions. And we hope that at the time, by these forums, etc., that those questions will be answered and they'll know how to deal with this. Because that is something that is lacking. I know there's help out there, and I know there's support, but I didn't know about it. Who do I turn to? Where do I find it? Didn't know. Travel was an important part. We had to travel from Rocky Mountain House. I lived near Rocky Mountain House to Red Deer and back, and we calculated with the amount of treatment I needed, etc. It would come close to 10,000 kilometers that we would have to travel in the winter, back and forth. And we didn't know what side effects my treatment would do to me. And so we said, well, this is not going to do. We're going to have to move to Red Deer somehow. So we investigated hotel costs, exorbitant, couldn't afford it. Could we really drive back and forth? No, we couldn't. So I looked at maybe board and room near the hospital, and I was lucky enough to find some place. It was about 7 blocks from the hospital, and it was only $700 a month, so there was something there. My wife Audrey was great support. She went there and checked it out, and that's what we decided to do. I would move to Red Deer for my treatment, and that's what I did. So now you've been diagnosed with cancer. How do you tell the others? I never even thought about that. I guess maybe I was selfish or whatever. I was thinking of myself. But my wife anticipated that, and she began a journal of my treatment and what was happening and when we should tell my children. I have 3 kids and their families, and how we would go about doing it, when would be appropriate time, because there was a lot of questions. Once they also heard, that Grandpa has cancer, my father has cancer. And so, like I said earlier, the conception is it's a death sentence. I don't know where that comes from, but I think it's there in the general public that anybody who has cancer is done. So we did an email eventually. When I was about halfway, I believe it was about halfway through my treatment, that we itemized everything and sent out that email, which was a great release of pressure on everybody. They didn't know how to deal with me. They didn't know how to talk to Grandpa. They didn't know how to talk to Dad. They didn't know what to say because they didn't know about cancer either. We did a lot in that email. It's a 3 or 4 page email explaining cancer, explaining the treatment, explaining the process and the prognosis. And you could almost hear the sigh of relief when they found out that my chances of survival were very good because of the early treatment, the early diagnosis, early treatment. Of course, what's really important in all this is your emotional belief in that you can beat this. And I see it all around me now when I go to treatment, etc. Yes, it can be beaten. Yes, it is being beaten. And I think the biggest thing is to get that idea across that it's not a death sentence. It changes your life. It changes your lifestyle. It forces you to think about other things, about your life, your spirituality, your future, etc., and your loved ones. Makes you think about them a lot. And of course, everybody hates pain and wonders about death, etc., etc. And forces you to think about those things. But I'm glad to say that, once you get the support you need and you find where you need to go to find that support, and the support from my family has been tremendous. So, yeah, I got it licked. I can go back fishing. Well, I think that fear comes from the lack of knowledge. It creates doubt. You have no answer. And it also creates doubt in the system. We don't know, I didn't know how it worked, what support was there out, what would my treatment consist of. And I am happy to say that the healthcare professionals that I ran into kind of took my hand, and they didn't baby me, but they listened to my concerns and were genuinely concerned about how I was feeling emotionally and physically, of course. This particular treatment that I took was very hard on me, and it affected my blood pressure. I never had problems with blood pressure before. It affected my energy. I had to fight that and trust in what the doctor said, like a certain type of exercise, certain type of food, take the medication, et cetera, et cetera. And when I found that I did those things according to the way they told me to, it worked out. And that was reassuring to me. But the biggest thing is, once I found out what was going to happen, how it was going to happen, all of the things that were questions in my mind. Once we solved the problem with travel, that was a big weight that was lifted off. We're retired, so we're on a fixed income. We could then, budget for my treatment, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, knowledge was key. Knowing what type of cancer I had, what the prognosis was, and what the plan was. And if I followed it, turned out okay. Well, I can't emphasize enough that they should have checks, PSA check annually, at least annually. Visit your doctor and get checked because early diagnosis is critical to survival. It increases your survival rate tremendously. And don't shy away from things like biopsy. Yeah, so they got to probe you and they got to take out samples, etc. But that's all for the good. And follow your healthcare professional's advice. I think that's what I found. But the first guardian of your health is yourself. And when you feel that you should get checked, get checked. And especially for men, prostate cancer can be beaten. And you should, take every avenue that you can to early diagnosis. An advocate, that's someone who is in your corner and who asks all those questions that you can't think. You see, initially you're overwhelmed. You get the diagnosis and that's it. You're dumbfounded. And so luckily, I had an advocate. And she was able to be by my side, supporting me, and to ask the questions that needed to be asked. A lot of times before, not with cancer, but when I would go to the doctor, I had this list of questions that I needed to ask him. And of course, I got home and I said, I didn't ask this, I didn't ask that, and I didn't ask that. So you missed out on it, right? But my wife was there. She had it all written out, her questions. She was ready to ask the questions, and she asked the key questions. I say it's so important to have an advocate, somebody in your corner, not only to support you, but to ask those questions and to see that what they say they're going to do, they do. End of story.